We often misunderstand intimacy as something purely physical. But for the avoidant man, who has learned to protect himself from emotional exposure, lovemaking becomes something far more revealing when love is genuine. It is not the act itself that speaks volumes. It's the subtle shifts, the quiet choices, and the emotional risks taken in the middle of it. When an avoidant man is in love, something changes. Not just in how he touches, but in how he lets himself be touched, not just by skin, but by trust. There are things avoidant men don't do casually, not because they're incapable, but because they're wired to protect themselves from vulnerability. They fear closeness not because they don't want it, but because deep down they doubt it will last. They've spent years learning to survive by pulling away before they ever get pulled in too deep. But when love is real, when it's safe, consistent, and patient, it begins to melt those old defense systems. And in the spaces where they used to shut down, they begin to show up. Genuine connection isn't built in the moments where everything is going according to plan. It's built in the moments where we let go of the plan entirely, where we stop performing, where we stop managing perceptions, where we stop trying to predict the outcome and start being present with another person as we really are. For people with avoidant tendencies, this is terrifying. Control has always been their shield. It's how they've kept themselves safe. But here's the truth. You can't hold on to control and reach for connection at the same time. One has to give. The need to control comes from fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being known too deeply. When someone has been let down emotionally, often in subtle and repeated ways, they begin to build a system inside them that says, if I stay in control, I won't get hurt again. They learn to pull away before they're pulled too close. They shut down before anyone has the chance to see their tender parts. They become excellent at appearing calm, self-sufficient, and unfazed. But underneath that surface is someone who deeply desires to be met, held, and seen without having to manage the experience. And this is where love comes in, not as a reward for perfection, but as a mirror that invites them back into their vulnerability. When connection is real, it does something uncomfortable. It asks us to release our grip, to stop scripting the conversation, to stop holding our breath. It asks us to show up without knowing how we'll be received. It asks us to lean in, even if we fear we might fall. For the avoidant person, this feels like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. But real love, when it's safe and steady, becomes the soft ground that catches them when they do. Control says, I'll be who you need me to be, so you don't leave. Connection says, I'll be who I am and trust that it's enough. Control creates roles, performances, distances. Connection creates space for messiness, honesty, imperfection. Control keeps the body close but the heart far. Connection lets the heart speak, even if the voice shakes. You can tell when someone has stopped trying to manage the moment and started trusting it instead. Their shoulders relax. Their gaze softens. Their words slow down. They're no longer trying to say the perfect thing. They're trying to say the real thing. It's important to understand that this shift doesn't happen instantly. For those who've relied on control for years, letting go of it isn't easy. It's not just a decision, it's a process. It happens over time in the safety of consistent care. Every time someone stays after a hard conversation, listens without trying to fix, or responds with empathy instead of judgment, it chips away at the old belief that control is the only way to stay safe. Eventually, connection starts to feel safer than control. Vulnerability becomes less of a threat and more of a bridge. And when that shift happens, when someone moves from control into connection, it's one of the most sacred moments in a relationship. It may look small from the outside, a deeper hug, a longer pause before they answer, a sigh that says, I'm here now. But inside, it's monumental. It means they're choosing presence over protection. They're letting themselves be affected by you, touched by you, not just physically, but emotionally. And in that moment, you're not just close. You're connected. Because genuine connection always starts where control ends. Not where things feel perfect, but where they feel real. Not where someone knows exactly what they're doing, but where they're willing to be seen even when they don't. That's where love breathes. That's where intimacy lives. And that's where the healing begins. Emotional risk is the highest form of intimacy because it requires the courage to be seen without guarantees. It's easy to show up when we're polished, composed, and certain of the outcome. But intimacy doesn't live in certainty. It lives in the vulnerable middle, where we don't know how we'll be received, but we show up anyway. Real closeness isn't created by saying the right thing or avoiding conflict. It's built in those quiet, trembling moments when we dare to be honest about what we feel, even if we're afraid it might change how someone sees us. For someone who is emotionally avoidant, this risk can feel overwhelming. They've been taught, whether through experience or subtle emotional neglect, that opening up often leads to disappointment, rejection, or being misunderstood. So they protect themselves, not necessarily with walls made of anger, but with distance, silence, perfectionism, or humor. They share enough to appear open, but never enough to feel exposed. And to them, that feels safe. But safety without vulnerability is not intimacy, it's coexistence. The moment someone takes the emotional risk to say, "I'm scared you might leave," or "I need reassurance even though I act like I don't," they're not being weak, they're being brave. They're pulling down their armor, knowing full well it might hurt. That's the moment intimacy becomes real. Because true connection doesn't come from always being strong. It comes from being transparent in our fear, our longing, and our wounds. It comes from trusting someone enough to hold our truth, even if it's messy. Emotional risk often shows up in small ways that don't look dramatic, but carry massive weight. It's the pause before telling someone what's really on your heart. It's the decision to let them see you cry instead of turning away. It's choosing to stay in the conversation when everything in you wants to shut down or walk out. These are the turning points where intimacy is either deepened or denied. Because in those moments, what we need most isn't a solution. It's to be held in our truth without shame. When someone opens up emotionally, they aren't just sharing a story. They're offering a piece of their inner world. That's not casual. That's sacred. And how we respond in those moments defines the relationship more than any romantic gesture ever could. Do we meet them with presence or impatience? Do we validate or dismiss? Do we lean in or look away? Because emotional risk is never really about the words themselves. It's about whether the heart behind those words feels safe after they've been spoken. The paradox is this: the more we risk emotionally, the deeper the potential for connection becomes. And yet, the more we've been hurt, the more we fear taking that risk again. That's why genuine intimacy isn't built on constant openness from day one. It's built on trust, slowly earned, consistently proven. With each small risk taken and held with care, the nervous system begins to relax. The walls start to come down. The connection begins to feel like home instead of a battlefield. Emotional risk doesn't mean oversharing or pouring everything out at once. It means offering what's real, piece by piece, and trusting that the right person won't flinch. It means letting someone see the parts you usually hide, the uncertainty, the fear, the unmet needs, and realizing they're still there, still choosing you, still staying close. That's what makes emotional risk the highest form of intimacy. It's not a performance. It's not about saying what's beautiful. It's about saying what's true. And when truth is met with acceptance instead of abandonment, we begin to heal in places we didn't even know were broken. That's where love becomes transformative. That's where intimacy stops being an idea and becomes an experience. That's where two people don't just exist side by side, they truly as a meet. A presence becomes the priority when love stops being about performance and starts being about connection. In a world that constantly tells us to do more, impress more, achieve more, being fully present with another person is one of the rarest and most powerful gifts we can offer. It means you're not just there in body, you're there in spirit, attention, and intention. You're not multitasking the moment, not mentally elsewhere, not trying to get somewhere else. You're anchored. And for someone with an avoidant attachment style, this kind of presence is not just a shift in behavior, it's a shift in identity. Avoidants are wired to retreat when things get too close. They may be physically present, but emotionally absent. They've learned that staying connected is risky, especially when emotions become intense or unpredictable. They tend to check out, go numb, or focus on the task rather than the connection. But when love is real, when it feels emotionally safe, non-judgmental, and steady, something powerful happens. Presence starts to matter more than control. Closeness becomes less threatening and more inviting. The focus is no longer on managing the experience, it's on feeling it. Presence in lovemaking, especially, takes on a deeper meaning. It's not about physical touch alone. It's about being attuned. It's about noticing the small things, the change in breath, the shift in energy, the unspoken needs that rise between words. It's about letting go of the outcome and sinking into the moment. For the avoidant man who's always lived in his head, presence means moving into his heart. It means slowing down enough to feel instead of evaluate, to connect instead of analyze. When presence becomes the priority, time feels different. Moments stretch, silence deepens. Touch becomes a language. There's no need to rush or perform. You're not trying to get anywhere. You're already there. That's the paradox. The more present you are, the more complete the moment becomes. And for someone who's spent a lifetime anticipating what might go wrong or trying to stay 2 steps ahead emotionally, presence is revolutionary. It's a declaration that right here, right now, is enough. Presence also means listening, not just to what is said, but to what is felt. It's when someone pauses what they're doing to really look at you, to hear you, to respond to your energy, not just your words. It's when they're not reaching for distraction, not escaping into their phone or thoughts, but giving you their undivided attention. That attention says, you matter. This matters. And for people who've experienced emotional distance in their past relationships, this kind of attention can be profoundly healing. The beauty of presence is that it doesn't require perfection. It doesn't mean you always know what to say or do. It simply means you're there with your full self. It means when things get uncomfortable, you don't check out or push away. You stay. You breathe. You stay curious. You remain open. And in doing so, you create a space where intimacy can breathe, where emotions can land safely, and where trust can grow. When presence becomes the priority, love no longer feels like a performance you have to maintain. It becomes an experience you share. There's a difference between being with someone and being with someone. One is proximity. The other is connection. One is about appearance. The other is about essence. And when the avoidant man begins to choose presence over protection, he starts to understand that intimacy isn't something to fear, it's something to inhabit. And it's in that choice, in that steady, intentional presence, that love begins to feel real, grounding, and deeply alive. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being avoided. He listens to the unspeakable, not just the words you say, but the ones you don't. The ones stuck in your throat, buried in your silence, or whispered through your body language. When love is genuine, especially from a man who has spent most of his life avoiding emotional depth, the way he listens begins to change. He stops hearing conversations as problems to solve and starts hearing them as feelings to witness. His attention becomes less about fixing and more about understanding. He learns to sit with discomfort rather than run from it. And in those quiet, tender moments where nothing is said but everything is felt, you realize he's listening to something far more sacred than words. He's listening to you. Avoidant men are naturally trained to pick up on emotional nuance. They've been conditioned to focus on logic, tasks, and surface-level interactions. Deep listening requires presence, patience, and vulnerability. 3 things that, for most of their lives, have felt unsafe. But when love feels safe, something softens. He starts to tune in, not out. He begins to notice the hesitation before you speak, the shift in your breath, the way your body tenses when something feels off. He's not asking to explain it all right away. He's just letting you know he sees it. He senses it. And more importantly, he cares enough to stay present with it. He listens with his whole body, his silence, his stillness, his openness. He doesn't interrupt or rush you to clarity. He doesn't try to lighten the moment with jokes or distance himself when your emotions rise. He stays. And not because he has the perfect response ready, but because he knows that sometimes just staying is the response. Being emotionally available doesn't always mean having the right words. It often just means refusing to disappear when things get emotionally heavy. For the avoidant man, this is a significant shift. It means choosing connection over escape. What makes this kind of listening so powerful is that it touches the parts of you that are used to being ignored. Maybe no one ever listened to your fears without minimizing them. Maybe your needs were met with irritation or silence. Maybe your tears were called dramatic or your longings labeled too much. So you stop saying the hard things out loud. You learn to keep them inside. But then someone comes along and listens, not just to the loud parts, but to the quiet ache underneath. And for the first time, you feel emotionally held, not just heard. When he listens to the unspeakable, it builds a new kind of intimacy. one that isn't just physical, but emotional, spiritual, energetic. You no longer have to perform to be loved. You don't have to phrase everything perfectly. You don't have to beg for space to be emotional. You just get to be, and he doesn't flinch. He doesn't retreat. He receives it. And that in itself is healing, because now your vulnerability doesn't have to live in isolation. It can live in connection. This kind of listening doesn't happen overnight. It's not a one-time act. It's a practice, a commitment, a way of showing love that says, I'm paying attention to more than your voice. I'm paying attention to your truth. And even if he's still learning the language of emotion, he's fluent in presence. He knows when something's off. He senses when you're withdrawing. He hears the story behind your silence, and instead of demanding you to speak, he makes room for you to be silent in peace. He listens to the unspeakable, not because he has mastered empathy, but because love has made him brave enough to try. And in that effort, in that steady, patient, tender kind of listening, he tells you the thing you've always needed to hear without saying a word. You don't have to hide anymore. See, he softens where he used to guard, and it's not because he's lost strength. It's because he's found safety. For a man who's spent years protecting his inner world, softening is not a passive act. It's a conscious decision. It's a shift that doesn't always happen with words, but with energy, with intention, with presence. He used to brace himself in intimacy, prepared for disappointment, ready to pull back the second he felt too seen. But love, genuine, consistent, emotionally safe love, has a way of melting the armor he once believed was necessary for survival. Avoidant men don't build walls because they don't care. They build them because they care too much, and were never taught how to handle that level of emotion. Guarding becomes second nature. They don't even know they're doing it. It shows up in sarcasm, in silence, in quick exits from vulnerable moments. It shows up in needing space the moment someone gets close. It shows up in being calm and collected when, deep down, they're overwhelmed with the intensity of feeling. They've learned that closeness can cost them their sense of control. So they protect it at all costs, even if it means missing out on connection. But something changes when love feels real, not just romantic, but as safe, not just exciting, but just stable. He begins to notice that you're not trying to trap him, fix him, or take from him. You're not demanding more than he can give. You're simply offering presence, patience, and permission to be who he is, flaws and all. And in that atmosphere, his nervous system slowly begins to relax. His fight or flight response quiets down. He begins to realize that he can stay open and still be okay. That's when the softening starts. It's subtle at first. He stays a little longer in conversations he would have previously exited. He lingers after moments of intimacy instead of shutting down or going quiet. He lets himself be touched emotionally, not just physically, and he starts to show emotion, not in grand, dramatic ways, but in the simple act of letting his guard drop even just a little. He doesn't have to be the most expressive person in the room. But the change is there. It's in how he looks at you. It's in how he listens. It's in how his body doesn't stiffen the moment something feels tender or real. He begins to risk more. Not in loud, sweeping gestures, but in quiet, everyday moments. He tells you something that he once would have kept to himself. He admits he doesn't have all the answers. He confesses that he's afraid, not because he wants to burden you, but because he finally trusts that you won't use his vulnerability against him. This is the core of softening. It's not the absence of fear, it's the presence of trust. Softening also means he stops trying to control how he's perceived. He no longer hides behind being put together all the time. He stops curating his emotions and starts expressing them honestly. He lets the cracks show, and instead of panicking, he watches you stay. And in watching you stay, he learns that love doesn't mean losing himself. It means finding himself in a way that no amount of distance or independence ever allowed. This shift isn't linear. He may still guard at times. Old habits don't disappear overnight. But the difference is now he notices, he comes back, he apologizes, he opens again. The softness doesn't erase his strength, it refines it. Because there's nothing weak about a man who chooses connection over control, who chooses to feel rather than numb, who chooses to trust even when every instinct tells him not to. He softens where he used to guard, not because love demanded it, but because love made it possible. And in that softening, the relationship no longer feels like a battlefield. It starts to feel like home. Aftercare becomes more intimate than the act itself when love is real, especially for a man who once kept his emotional world locked behind walls. For the avoidant man, sex might have once been the safest part of connection, predictable, controlled, physically close but emotionally distant. But genuine love shifts everything. It turns what happens after into the most revealing part of the experience. The moments following intimacy are no longer filled with silence, distance, or retreat. Instead, they become a space for closeness, comfort, and emotional availability. In these moments, he shows you not just that he desires you, but that he cherishes you. Avoidants often struggle most in the aftermath of emotional intensity. Physical intimacy can be overwhelming because it blurs the line between body and soul, exposing feelings they've spent a lifetime avoiding. After the act, their instinct might be to detach, to pull away, get dressed quickly, turn to distractions, or shut down emotionally. It's not because they don't care. It's because they don't know how to stay present in vulnerability. They've trained themselves to retreat before closeness becomes too much to handle. But when love is safe and secure, something begins to shift. Instead of pulling away, he stays. And that simple decision carries more intimacy than any physical gesture ever could. Aftercare is not just physical. It's emotional, spiritual, and psychological. It's in the way he holds you, not out of obligation, but out of desire. It's in the way his breathing slows to match yours, how he keeps your hand in his without letting go. It's in the way he checks in quietly and consistently, asking if you're okay, not because he has to, but because he genuinely wants to know. It's in the way he looks at you, unguarded, with no agenda other than being with you in the moment. These are not grand gestures. They are intimate ones. And for the man who used to hide behind emotional distance, this is love in its most raw and vulnerable form. The way he responds after intimacy tells you everything about how safe he feels and how safe he wants you to feel. When a man lingers, when he doesn't rush to reclaim his space or withdraw into silence, he's not just being affectionate, he's being present. And presence after intimacy means more than words ever could. It says, you're not just wanted, you're cared for. It says, I'm still here. Even when the passion fades, my tenderness doesn't. For a man with avoidant tendencies, allowing himself to experience emotional intimacy post-connection is deeply transformative. It proves to him that closeness doesn't have to end in overwhelm. That staying doesn't have to cost him his autonomy. That holding someone emotionally doesn't drain him. It grounds him. In these moments, he is not performing. He is not defending. He is simply being, and his being, his presence, becomes the most intimate act of all. Aftercare becomes a space where real bonding happens, where vulnerability meets response, where emotions are soothed, not ignored, where softness is sustained beyond the physical. And it teaches both people in the relationship that intimacy isn't defined by intensity, it's defined by consistency, by what happens when the adrenaline settles and all that's left is the truth of how you make each other feel. For the man who once left after intimacy to protect himself, choosing to stay, choosing to care, choosing to hold is a radical shift. It's not just a sign of love. It's proof of it. Because in that choice, he's no longer afraid of what connection awakens in him. He's learning that the most intimate part of lovemaking isn't the act itself. It's what happens when two people stay in the quiet afterward, hearts still open, bodies still soft, choosing to remain, fully present, fully human, fully connected.